Welcome to part 2 of virtual machine features and specs. And just as a quick reminder, not to drive you nuts, but we're talking about virtual machines created with VMware's Workstation product. Now, when we're talking about IDE drives with our virtual machines, you can access up to 4 devices with a virtual machine. Now, here's one caveat you need to watch for. DVD disks can be used, but only to read data into the virtual machine. You can't use them for video. It's not supported, and so that's just going to be a limitation you have to live with for now with Workstation. Now, the disk that you use for your virtual machines and Workstation can be either virtual, which means it's kind of a little parking lot area out there on your host system's disk, or it can be a total separate physical disk, and you can go either way. Now, virtual disks have a 2 terabyte limit. The physical disk is going to be the size of the disk. CD-ROM drives can be either physical CD-ROM drives or, and this was the really cool feature about virtual computing the first time you ever saw it, was that you could use ISO image files and they would behave as a CD with an ISO file burned onto it. So I can just download an ISO image, say from Microsoft's side of an operating system or a particular application, say like Office, and then I can access that ISO image file as if I put a CD-ROM disk into the drive. So that's a really cool feature. Now let's talk about SCSI drives. You can have up to 60 devices. That's not a misprint. Up to 60 devices on the SCSI side. The disk, again, can be virtual or physical. Your virtual disks, again, have a 2 terabyte limit. Then when you're talking about serial and parallel ports on a virtual machine, you can have up to 4 serial or COM ports, and you can have up to 3 LPT or bidirectional parallel ports. So you can set those up and access them through the virtual machine. Then we're talking about USB ports. USB 1.1 version ports are supported by default. So if I create a virtual machine using VMware Workstation, USB 1.1 is happening. I don't have to worry about it. If I want 2.0, I'll have to go configure it in the virtual machine settings. Okay, so you have to kind of go turn that on to get USB 2.0 to get the upgraded speed and so forth. Now, watch for this one. USB 3.0 is supported only in Linux guests running kernel version 2.6.35 or later through a virtual XHCI USB controller. Now, the Windows operating systems don't have a generic XHCI USB controller out there yet, so you can't use USB 3.0 in a Windows guest virtual machine. So just kind of watch for that. If it's a limiting factor, you'll just have to deal with it for a while. Now, on the networking inside a Workstation virtual machine, you're going to have 3 Ethernet switches configured by default. Now, watch this term switches, because we haven't really been thinking this way, especially in the Microsoft world for a while, but it's going to click as soon as you see this. There is a bridged switch, a host only, Ethernet switch, and NAT. Now, really what we normally think of when we see these things is we just see network functionality, okay? Bridged means that the virtual Ethernet functionality of my virtual machine is connected out directly to the actual physical network adapter in my host system. And so as a result, I'm going to share the IP address, and it's just going to be kind of bridged through. Host only means that the Ethernet functionality works only in this host, and I can communicate with another host, but I can't communicate out to my host system or to the outside world. So host only is great for building kind of test Ethernet environments within a host system, but you don't want to get out to the outside world. NAT, network address translation, is just what it's always been: separate interior IP address for your virtual machine, a different exterior address for your host machine, and then address translation can be used to make sure that everything moves back and forth. Now, you can set up to 10 switches on a Windows host operating system. So if you're running, on a Windows host OS, you get 10 switches. If you've installed VMware Workstation on a Linux host, notice up to 255 switches can be built. Now, when you're working with these switches, it supports most Ethernet-based protocols. Of course, we're talking about everybody's favorite TCP/IP, NetBEUI, Novell's NetWare, and the bottom line is pretty much if it's an Ethernet-based protocol that's being used anywhere else, you're probably going to be able to use it in the virtual machine. So that's an idea of what you can expect to see, what you can configure and use inside your virtual machines in VMware Workstation.